Hey guys, Joe Hubbard here. I wanted to do something a little different this week. I just wanted to share a story with you that happened a long time ago. This was in 1977 when I was living in Los Angeles, and I had the amazing opportunity to meet and hang out with Jaco Pastorius. Everyone has a Jaco story, but I feel mine is rather unique because the time in his history, 1977, he was at the top of his game. And, in his own words, like no one could touch him. He was an untouchable musician, and he was doing things constantly evolving and taking the bass to the next level. And what was amazing about this was, when I moved to LA from Boston, I'd been a student at the Berklee College of Music, and I left Berklee and moved to LA for about 8 months. And while I was there, I got the opportunity to hang and spend some real quality time with Herbie Hancock. And this was through a connection I had from when I was back at Berklee. A bass player called Buster Williams is a very good friend of mine. And, we grew really close when he used to come through Boston when I was at Berklee. And he recommended that I get in touch with Herbie, and he hooked the whole thing up. And Herbie was a very, very cool and, kind of a sort of spiritual mentor to me at the time, which really helped me out, and helped me to find particular directions in my life that I didn't have together at all at that point. And it was through meeting Herbie and hanging with Herbie that I was able to develop a relationship with a French composer called Michel Columbier. And if you haven't heard of Michel Columbier, you've got to do your research and find the record that he did, which is just called Michel Columbier, but it has a track on it called Dreamland. And it's kind of a classic record, and it's definitely worth buying. It has Jaco on it, Steve Gadd, Larry Carlton, Abe Laboriel plays on a few tracks. I think another bass player, Jerry Knight. But it was very cool to, get this hookup with Michel, because Michel gave me some opportunities through his brother-in-law to be doing some demos for various artists while I was in Los Angeles. And that's the way you kind of get your foot on the first rung of the ladder when you're over there. And that really kind of opened up some new horizons for me, just getting that far while I was there. And one day I had gone over to Michel's house, and it was about 3 in the afternoon, and there was music just blaring out of the window. And if you set the scene, it was just north of Sunset, in near the comedy club in West LA. And it was really just right out of a scene in the movie Boogie Nights. So he had this cool little house just up in the hills, and I stopped over there just to hang out, really, and the music was blaring, and I walked through the door, and I just it was a little party going on, and I saw Michel, and I walked up to him, and I said, "Hey, Michel, what is this music?" And he said, "It's Jaco Pastorius' music." And then he went, "By the way, Joe, this is Jaco." And Jaco was standing right next to him, but I didn't recognize him because I had remembered Jaco from the first solo album. That picture of him was quite regal, and he always looked, I remember this article by Joni Mitchell where she said Jaco on that first record looked like a Tibetan sage. But when I met him, he had hair halfway down his back, in a ponytail. He had no shirt on. He was super, super tall, and just had a pair of cutoff jeans, barefoot. And, he was just hanging out, and I when Michel introduced me to him, I said something like, "Hey, I'm Joe. I'm a bass player too, and just thinking, wow, uh, why do you say stupid things at particular points when you meet people that are really influential, like, as though he really cares. But to his credit, he was an amazing guy, very charming, took the time to talk with me about bass and, to hang out with me a little bit. But I was really wanting to be the observer because I kind of felt, man, I'm not worthy here to hang with someone like Jaco. This guy has changed the world in bass guitar. And, I'm just going to sit and like hang out and just, watch what happens here. And what we had been listening to, as we got into our conversation, was the rough mixes for the tune River People. And it was just killing it. And Jaco was very animated, and he was very like intense about describing what he was doing with this track. And he had said to me, he goes, I wanted to like, I want to animate, I want to like write music for like a Disney animated film, and this is the kind of music I want to put to it. And he was like sort of going through different characters in his head of what would be happening at certain points of the tune. It was just like really cool to just like hang and take some of that in, take some of that greatness in from him, and but what then happened was, the second tune came on, which was punk jazz. And if you haven't heard that off of Mr. Gone, you've got to actually hear it. I might link it over here, just I'm sure there's a video on YouTube that has that track. And listen to the solo in the beginning. Well, everyone's jaw had hit the floor because at that time, 1977, nobody was playing like that. Not really, no one that had been really come out and been discovered. For instance, Jeff Berlin really didn't hit big time internationally until about 1979. But 77, it was not many people in the world were actually doing that. Not even Stanley Clarke or Alphonso Johnson. Now everyone does that, but then it was very small, to hear someone playing like Coltrane kind of giant steps ideas on bass and just like burning like he was on this punk jazz thing was just like incredible. And I remember as we were sitting there, I mean, you could have, if the music wasn't on, you could have heard a pin drop, because everyone was just frozen in the space of time of that solo and just focused entirely on what he was doing. And I then looked over at Jaco. He's about 2 or 3 people down from me. We're all like standing in a line in front of the stereo system. And Jaco was doing this. He's blowing on his fingers. And I just thought like, the coolest thing about Jaco was that he was able to do that without coming across as an asshole. Like he was able to do that with charm and dignity rather than trying to make everyone think that he was better than everyone. He knew he was better than everyone. That was the difference. It was a weird kind of reality, but it was true. And he used to say things like that. Hey, no one can touch what I do. It's no brag, it's fact. He used to say that all the time. In fact, he said that there. And when the punk jazz thing came on the slow section, he cracked me up because he sits down at Michel's piano and he starts playing those voicings, and his hands are huge. I mean, just like massive. And he's playing these piano voicings, and he said to Michel, he goes, Michel, man, no one can play these voices. He said, I was at Herbie's house the other day, and Herbie can't even get near this stuff, man. He said, man, Wilt Chamberlain couldn't even play these voicings. And if you're too young to remember who Wilt Chamberlain was, some of the old timers are probably laughing now, but Wilt Chamberlain was, back in the 70s, one of the top basketball players, and he was really one of the first guys that could hold the basketball with one hand. So his hands were like huge, and Jaco's like, Will Chamberlain can't even play these things, man. It was just insane, you know. But reflecting upon these stories, I can't tell you the inspiration that I got from hanging with Jaco and all the people that were there that day. There was some other musicians there as well, and just the fellowship and the sharing is so important, and I think that kind of reflects on what I'm doing with my YouTube channel is trying to give that little bit back to people, and also trying to actually keep the spark alive for the music and what music meant to people like Jaco, like what pushed that, that pushed music so far forward, and it pushed the bass so far forward, that sometimes when you look at what's going on, a lot of people almost want to be moving backwards, so those stories inspire me to keep going and to really keep that stuff alive, and that's just something I wanted to share with you today.